kind of from the Eventbrite page, the City and County of Denver have developed a climate action plan and set out strong goals for buildings, including all new buildings and homes being net zero energy by 2030, and all existing buildings and homes net zero energy by 2040. So to work towards these goals, Denver has passed the Energize Denver ordinance and the International Energy Conservation IECC amendments. So this presentation will cover elements of the ordinance, timeline for implementation, and the expected results. Group 14 will discuss how this impacts new and existing buildings and what steps building owners and managers can take to achieve compliance. So with that, our first presenter is Derek Valenti, who's the alternate compliance administrator for the Energize Denver program, a division of the high performance buildings and homes team at CASR, Denver Climate Action Sustainability and Resiliency Office. His role is to work with properties that have issues achieving the Energize Denver ordinance targets and develop a pathway to compliance. Derek graduated from the University of Virginia with a master's degree in environmental science. He's spent the past 10 years focusing on energy efficiency in commercial businesses with building analyst and multifamily building analyst certifications from the Building Performance Institute. In this work, he takes a holistic approach in examining buildings to ensure they are operating at optimal performance. So I'll hand it off to Derek.
Thank you for that. All right, I'm going to share my screen really quick. And I'm also going to turn my camera off. That way you don't get distracted by me during the presentation. Let's do this. And we'll go full screen. All right, so I'm going to touch on the Energize Denver ordinance today. One of the things before we get started is we just released, had a couple rounds of public comment as we're trying to build out a technical guidance. And that is actually going to be scheduled to be released on November 17th. And so we'll be going over some of the info that will be in that technical guidance, but some of other things will be released on November 17th. So please keep your eyes open for that, as we'll have a bunch more things for everybody to learn with their target adjustments and compliance options that we're exploring. So with that, we'll quick touch on the program. Commercial multifamily buildings are responsible for about 49% of Denver's GHG emissions. 82% of those emissions are coming from buildings that are 25,000 square feet and above, 18% coming from buildings 25,000 square feet and below. And so, as was stated earlier, we're committed to eliminate greenhouse gases by 2040. And with that, we want all new buildings and homes to be net zero energy by 2030. And the Energize Denver program has some lofty goals to hit by 2030 that we'll be going over in just a second. Also, please, if you have any questions, if you could put it in the chat, or if I'm going too fast, tell me to slow down, or if you'd like to stop and revisit a slide, because I might not cover all the detail, just tell me to go back as well. So Energize Denver ordinance cover 3 sections. First is electrification, and that department is helping to move the city away from natural gas. A large portions were offering education and building incentives, updating building codes. Right now, we're actually trying to run some pilot programs, and I'll share some links later for people for those multifamily properties or offices in the city that are looking to potentially electrify before the program really hits the ground running. We have a benchmarking portion that I hope most people are familiar with. We're looking at Portfolio Manager, specifically for buildings 25,000 square feet and above. We're looking at annual energy use and benchmarking. And then the last portion we have is our performance, both with buildings 25,000 square feet and above, as well as smaller buildings program that's prescriptive for lighting and solar for 5,000 to just under 25,000 square feet. Electrification updates to codes. So it's a quick outline of where our electrification requirements are moving over the next couple of years. Starting in 2023, there's going to be a permit process that we would like people to start looking at the potential for gas systems and electrification. In 2025, we're going to start requiring easy to electrify equipment such as furnaces, rooftop units, individual water heaters to upgrade to electrify when cost effective. And then by 2027, we're going to have heat pumps required upon replacement for hard to electrify equipment. The 2022 building energy code. So these are for new builds. This one is actually not my specific department, so I don't have as much knowledge on that. But the new building code is trying to go to net zero by 2030 for any new buildings. We are currently in the process of designing the code, and we should, over the next couple months, have some legislation available going through approval now that will offer some more information on it. The code adoption process, the start is where we are right now. So this summer, or last summer, or last 2 years actually, sorry. We've taken it from develop the city proposal amendments to now we are currently at city council where there will be a vote, and if approved over the next couple months, we'll have an updated building and fire code. Hopefully around 2023, early 2023. Upcoming electrification incentives. So we're working on currently creating an incentive program for multifamily and commercial buildings. Right now we have a large focus looking at under-resourced buildings. And so we're doing a pilot program that's trying to prioritize that first. And so if anybody has any under-resourced buildings that they think might be a good candidate, where they have systems that are nearing the end of useful life, we're running pilot programs and would love to explore potential electrification upgrades with you. Again, I'll share those links at the end of my presentation. Benchmarking. So as of 2016, we started a requirement to make all buildings over 25,000 square feet benchmark in the city. So we actually have an online resource where you can look at those buildings that have been benchmarking and look at their Energy Star scores. Every year, by June 1st, you're supposed to be submitting the benchmarking from the prior year. So 2024, we are going to require that info to be submitted by June 1st of 2025. One of the new things we're going to do for our target years is we're going to have a third-party data verification requirement to ensure that everything that's being submitted is as accurate as possible. So upcoming requirements, as I touched on, the interim years of 2024, 2027, and then the final year of 2030, we're going to have a third-party data verification for the benchmarking that's being submitted. We'll have that more information on that with our technical guidance that's being released on November 17th. And I do see something in the chat. Okay. CPD hopes to have a draft. Yes, for energy code and green code to the committee members on or before. Thank you, Jamie. And my screen froze. There we go. Performance requirements. So for all buildings 25,000 square feet above, we're going to explore setting targets, target adjustments, renewables, electrification, alternate compliance. And so right now we have targets set for 80 different property types. Our targets are set to the 15th percentile for all covered buildings in Denver. So with that, 85% of existing buildings will have to take some form of action to improve their efficiencies. Mixed buildings, building usage types will have a weighted blended target based on those 3 largest building types. And as we talked about earlier, we have a progression from your current EUI to your target EUI. So in the interim years of 2024 and 2027, we would want to see some progress towards your final target goal of 2030. These are also minimum requirements. If somebody would like to hit that 2030 target earlier, there's no repercussions for doing that. The sooner that you can hit it, the better. So target adjustments, let's see how I can minimize this thing. So one of the things we're looking at, and will be more information than technical guidance, is we do understand that certain buildings, even though they're the same property type, have certain inherent characteristics that make the building's energy usage tougher to hit the targets that we set. And so in that new technical guidance coming out, we're going to have adjustments that look at operating hours for specific building types. We're going to take into consideration indoor and outdoor swimming pools and have adjustments based on that. Look at parking structures and what type of parking structure that is, as well as data centers. We're also going to want to make sure that anything that's submitted in the past is submitted properly. So we're going to re-examine building classifications, make sure square footage is correct. And then if there's any building alterations from since 2019, our baseline submission year, if there's any major renovations, we'll re-explore to make sure that it's properly submitted under the right property type. Obviously, if your building's getting demolished, we're gonna need proper paperwork to show that the building is planning on being demolished, and we can get you exempt from the program. Electrification credit. So this is going along a potential target adjustment. When you submit your information, we're going to look at the amount of electric usage on the building. And if a building is 80% of the usage is electric, what we're going to do is offer a 10% increase in your 2030 EUI target. And so this is going to be a retroactive target adjustment that we're offering. Obviously, part of the city's goal is for the city to electrify as much as possible and reduce the usage of natural gas. And so with that, we'll have, if your existing property is 80% electrified, we retroactively give 10% EUI credit. And that will go to your 2030 target and also affect your interim targets and increase your interim targets as well. If your building isn't currently 80% electrified, but you're planning on hitting 80% electrification by 2030, we are going to have an online application where, if that's your goal, we will allow that 10% credit for your interim targets as well as the 2030 target. But we'll have a higher fine structure if you do not hit 80% that you're hoping to hit by then, by 2030. Renewable credits. So we are taking into consideration solar or wind, both on-site and off-site. It will be credited to the building's total energy use before performance targets are evaluated, regardless of your REC retainage. And so the way this is going to work is we're going to look at your 12 months of renewables, and we're going to subtract your renewable usage from, that'll be on the next slide, from your total annual usage to help you give an EUI adjustment. Ideally, we're trying to incentivize people to do long-term contracts if they're doing any type of contract, 5 years plus. If you're doing a short-term subscription, month to month, that subscription is only going to be applicable on a certain percentage of usage for your interim targets of 2024 and 2027. They won't be able to be applied to your 2030 targets. There's a quick table of samples of renewable usage. So on-site solar wind, we consider that a long-term contract. The way we want documentation is we're going to look at the total kWh generation and proof of ownership. Basically, we were going to want to make sure for all of any type of renewable contracts you have, we're going to want proof of subscription or proof of ownership, as well as your total kWh generation. I can come back to this slide if people want to look it over a little bit more, but I don't know if we have to read through every different subscription option. And this will also be released in November when the full guidance is out. Question with that. Also, please, if you do have questions, I want to make sure I get to them. Do offsite renewables need to be on the same grid as the building in question? No, they do not. As long as we can associate them with the property of the building owner, you should be able to attribute it to the property. Alternate compliance. So timeline adjustments. So we are offering timeline adjustments so we can extend past the 2030 target under certain situations. So if you're planning for something like end of system life, major renovations, if it's a historical landmark, financial distress, if you're looking to electrify. Steam loop is also a big one. So we're actually exploring, we do understand it's very hard to get off the steam loop. And so we're actually starting to build a focus group for steam loop specifically. So if anybody has any properties they know are within that, we'd love to help or get them included in this group so we can talk a little bit more in depth and understand and help adjust targets if necessary to ensure them getting into compliance. Do I know if Renewable Connect will have more space in the future? So Excel is working on a program right now where they're trying to extend and open up more opportunities. I can send a link after this if you're interested. I do not know to the full extent that Excel is working on, but they have told us that they're trying to grow and expand it in order to hit the capacity they need. Pass one. All right, good. Timeline adjustment application. So in order to receive a timeline adjustment, we're going to require submission of a couple items. The goal of this is one, to build a plan to show that there's a plan built out for specific upgrades in order to get the building into compliance. And so what we're going to require is an ASHRAE level 2 energy audit, as well as a retrofit plan, electrification feasibility report, operations and maintenance program documentation, and any supporting documentation that will tell the story of what needs to get done. The goal is to tell the story of what needs to get done in order for the building to reach compliance. And so one of the things we'll be considering with this too, with certain equipment, is we're going to look at useful life of each piece of equipment. So ideally, people are planning for when a piece of equipment is getting towards the end of their useful life, what they're going to upgrade it with, and understand the efficiencies that are going to come with that. And so once they submit that plan, we'll review it with the building owner, and we'll come with an agreed upon timeline, and penalties will be assessed if the plan is not completed as agreed upon. So performance evaluation. First thing we're going to look at is allowing any type of adjustment, where if it's target adjustment or percent electrification. From there, we're going to look at the renewable credits and subtract the KBTU from the total usage of the property. If that's not going to be enough to get to compliance, what we can do is explore an alternate compliance pathway, something like a timeline adjustment, in order to upgrade specific equipment to get them across the finish line. And then obviously in the end, we're going to see if the site EUI is able to get to the target given to them by 2030. Penalties. So obviously our goal as CASR, which is for everybody to reach their targets by 2030. We're committed to do everything we can between alternate compliance options and give flexibility for all these buildings to get into compliance. But with that, penalties will be assessed by examining a 12-month performance period for the target year after benchmarking is received, so by June 1st of the following year. And the way the penalties are going to work is it's going to be actual KBTU used versus target KBTU, which is the equivalent of KBTU not achieved. And we're going to multiply that by our penalty cost to get the final penalty amount. Is there a bond or other stake dangling over projects prior to non-compliance penalty? When there's an agreed upon time. When you say bond, can you elaborate a little bit more on that, Andy?
Yeah, I was specifically asking because Seattle has something kind of similar where if they are doing like a development incentive where a project has an agreed upon EUI target with a 12-month post-occupancy period, they require the building owner to sign essentially like a statement of financial responsibility or just have some other kind of like paperwork in place so that it's not just like you issue them a penalty but don't really have any recourse. And it's kind of caused some challenges where obviously that's a bit of a challenge for a lot of owners and they don't like it. Like we also have an outcome-based code where that bond is required, and it's been a pretty significant disincentive to owners utilizing that compliance pathway. And I was just wondering, like, how will you confirm that you can more or less actually like assess the penalty?
So our penalty with our penalties, the city holds the right to potentially put a lien on the property if penalties are not paid.
That makes sense. Thank you.
No problem. Nick, I think we're going to get to that, answer that question in just a second. So if we don't, let me know and I'll make sure to address it. But so here is our basic penalty structure. So if your building is not being benchmarked, there's a $2,000 minimum annual cost that'll be associated with that. But if you're not hitting your target's interim and 2030 target, we're going to look at a cost of 30 cents per KBTU not achieved. If your building does hit the 2030 target, target EUI score, what we're going to have after that is what we call a maintenance fee. And so that's going to be 5 cents per KBTU not achieved. If there's a timeline adjustment that's agreed upon and you're unable to hit the projected retrofit plan and KBTU, the penalty is going to be 50 cents per KBTU. And then if there's any inaccuracy with information or withholding, we have the right to charge up to 70 cents, which is how the ordinance is written, per KBTU not achieved. And so this is a little bit more on how the penalties will be assessed. And so we have our first interim target of 2024. And so what we're going to do is June 1st of 2025 is when we'll be reviewing all benchmarking submissions from 2024. So that's when our first round of penalties will be given. And then the next one will be in 2020, based on the 2027 submission. Sorry, tongue tied right now. So that'll be in 2028. And then in 2030, moving forward, we'll then charge every year that the building is not hitting compliance after that fact. Additional performance requirements. So first is our manufacturing, agriculture, and industrial. We're still in the process of building this scope out. And so we expect that to be finalized by December of 2023. One of my coworkers, Daniel, is currently working on that. And so if there is an MAI building right now, they're currently exempt from benchmarking. The one thing we do ask is those building owners fill out a form, which I'll share after my presentation. That way we're building some stakeholder engagement groups to get a better understanding. The current goal will be to achieve a 30% savings across the sector. Obviously, we know manufacturing, agriculture, and industrial buildings operate a little differently than some of the other buildings that we have in the ordinance. And so MAI buildings we consider any building with a process load and energy consumed or for a bona fide purpose other than heating, cooling, ventilation, domestic water, cooking, lighting, appliances, office equipment, small or other plug loads. And so if you do have any properties that think may fall under MAI, again, please fill out the link that I'll share at the end. What's the purpose of the maximum penalty range? I'll go back. So the purpose of the penalties altogether, and what we did and what we looked at is we tried to examine what the cost would be per KBTU for a building, what the equivalent would be for the cost of being out of compliance versus what if they had invested that money into their building, that would have been the cost for them to get into compliance. And so when we looked at the number, the original ordinance was written that we had the right to charge up to 70 cents per KBTU. We knew that number was pretty aggressive. And so we started to do a deeper dive into, on average, what the cost would be for buildings to get into compliance. And so we came up with the cost of about 30 cents. Also with the penalty, any money that's being paid for a penalty, what CASR is going to do is we're going to turn that money back around and reinvest it back into the programs and put it back into other buildings in the city to help them get into compliance. So ideally, instead of paying the penalty fee, people are working and putting that money into their building. So our small buildings program, the way we're implementing this program is any building between 5,000 to 24,999. Those buildings must have 90% LED load or equivalent, or they must meet 20% of their building usage in renewables, solar specifically. We have some targeted timelines with that. So buildings 15,000 square feet and up are required to hit the goal by 2025. And then every year after that, we have 10 to 15 and 5 to 10. We're currently working on the technical guidance for that as well. If anybody has any more questions, I'd be more than happy to share the person designing that program with you. Last, and then I'll go back to the chat and answer any of the questions. A little timeline for us. So with benchmarking performance, right now, October, November, we're updating the rulemaking. The rulemaking and everything should be out mid-November. December, we'll be working on some outreach on the technical guidance and reviewing any questions people may have. In January, we're going to reissue 2030 targets to all buildings with those adjustments that'll be mentioned in the new technical guidance. For building codes over the next few months, we're looking for the adoption of the 2022 building code by council. The adoption date determines the timing for the new code and requirements. Electrification incentives, we have a lot going on there simultaneous, all at the same time. So the big thing right now is we're trying to recruit some electrification pilots again. So if you're interested and you think you have a good property that might qualify for the program, I will add the pilot submission form into the chat after the meeting. Questions? I think I have one more question in the chat. What would determine if the penalty is at the maximum or minimum level? So the maximum level is if a building's not benchmarking and they more or less are lying, or we catch them making up information about their building, is when we would have the highest penalty level. Other than that, we're going to be looking at the 30 cents per KBTU out of compliance for virtually everything besides that situation. There is a 50 cents, and I'll go back. So we do have a 50 cents per KBTU for being out of compliance with the timeline adjustment. So that means if you don't hit the targets that was agreed upon with us, then the penalty structure will be higher than the original just being out of compliance. why is parking included in the drafts issued in August and September? What is the intent there and how does that work with Energy Star portfolio manager definitions? So I don't know if this is going to exactly answer your question, but the purpose of including parking is we're going to give a target adjustment that's going to look at square footage and the Energy Star EPA guidelines on additional usage per square foot of specific parking types. And we're going to offer a target adjustment based on the size and type of parking garage that's existing. Hope that answers that question.
All right,
So will it apply to standalone parking or just parking that's already part of another structure like an office building or multifamily?
It would
That's
not
3 to 9 kBTUs per square foot.
So it would not be standalone parking because are you referring to a parking building over 25,000 square feet? That would be part of the program itself.
You tell me, I didn't write it.
So a standalone parking structure has its own guidelines. This is referring to an existing building that has parking included in it. So we're offering a target adjustment for the parking structure in an existing building.
and we will have a Q&A at the very end of this. So I'm going to kind of keep things going just to give enough time for Celeste and Taylor to keep going. So thank you very much, Derek. I'll go ahead and introduce Celeste, who is a professional engineer and principal at Group 14 Engineering, overseeing the existing building and monitoring-based commissioning services. She has over 20 years experience in the building systems field, including mechanical system design, retro commissioning, energy audits, energy training, and building analytics. Celeste has supported the City of Denver climate initiatives with participation in the 80 by 50 committee, the Climate Action Task Force, the current Energize Denver Task Force, and other technical support. I'll hand it to you, Celeste.
Thank you. All right, well, I will do a little bit of expansion on some of the information already shared. Let me share my screen here. All right. Get it out of. Trying to get in the view where I can see the chat. Hang on. Sorry, 1 second here. There. All right, so we'll get rolling here with some additional details. I'm going to try not to repeat too much information, but I am going to add a little bit more context I think will be relevant to some of the energy providers and energy modelers on the call today. So we've already heard kind of the overall timeline and the various elements. So we're looking at those interim targets in 2024, 2027, and 2030. I wanted to hone in a little bit on some of the rules and regulations, details, and changes that have occurred in the most recent rounds. The last of which Denver indicated that they did not receive as many comments, so it was pretty close to final. in the last version that they submitted. So a couple of these were mentioned, but just wanted to give a little bit more information on the data verification. So this is now going to be required for each period, so 2024, 27, and 30. And I put on here the credentials that the rules and regulations allow for people to perform this assessment or this verification. And what the requirement is to complete the Energy Star data verification checklist. So the main things that we're checking on this are the factors that go into EUI. So the main being the area, and then the other being the energy use. I know we've been starting to check this for a lot of buildings, and a pretty high number of them have something wrong with either of those two numbers. Either it was an area that was maybe taken off of a lease agreement that is not the actual gross area of the building, or a tenant meter that was missed and just wasn't included in Energy Star. So it will be important. I don't think it'll go straight to the maximum fine if you accidentally have wrong data, but it will need that verification at that time. And just, it's a lot of buildings, so it's maybe not the most fun work, but a lot of people are going to be needed to do these verifications. I just wanted to clarify on the target adjustments. I know there was a lot of questions and discussions about this early on. The target adjustments used to be an alternate compliance pathway, and there was talk of potentially doing energy models or energy audits to say what a building could do. At this time, Denver has decided not to go down that route of submitting what the building kind of maximum savings potential. It's too difficult to be consistent. It's unless the city's doing the analysis themselves, expecting every energy consultant to do the same energy audit or the same energy modeling to say what is really possible, was just determined not to be feasible or fair. So really, it's just sticking to the adjustments that are noted by Energy Star that have very clear impacts to EUI. So if you have a swimming pool, Energy Star says how much extra energy that would use. So these adjustments would be kind of tacked on to your target to allow this additional amount of energy. That note at the bottom, I think this is a point of feedback that we've said several times of, what if you have something weird like a cell tower on top of your building that has this process load? We'd like to be able to include that. That can be looked at as part of the target adjustment, but is not specifically on the list. So for the things like process loads, Denver's response was, it's better just to take that out entirely and not even have that in your EUI to begin with, if it's really not building energy. Any other changes are only the items on this list, but they hope that there will be more modifications. Right now, operating hours are only for this specific set of buildings. Operating hours might affect other buildings. Right now, that's not an allowed alternate, or that's not an allowed adjustment. So this adjustment happens kind of up at the front. You submit for an adjustment, you can fill out a form. It's not an alternate compliance path to say that your building can't meet these targets. Some other highlights on the alternate compliance options that are still currently included. The timeline, we heard some kind of details of what's required with that. Some kind of the items in blue here are some of the kind of changes in the rules and regs from the original. For the timeline, you can adjust multiple. You can say, I can't meet 24 or 27 because I'm doing a chiller replacement in 2028. So there is that availability now. Electrification was a change from the original. It was previously this kind of prescriptive option that allowed you to skip your interim targets as long as you had LED lighting, and it was actually a different percentage of electrification. And that one, I think that one maybe was 70%. The two percentages were different. Now it's all one thing. So if you've electrified 80%, and that's based on your site energy use, then you can have an adjusted target. And that is adjusting your EUI target. So if you had an office building of 48, it would be a 10% change to that target is what that change is, not coming off of your actual energy use the way it is with solar. The 30% EUI reduction, one change there is that or at least one thing I've noticed, I'm not actually sure if this was a change, but there is an item in this one that you can apply for this if you are a historical building and you don't feel that 30% reduction is reasonable. So right now, all these building types that don't have an EUI target are given just a flat, you have to reduce 30%. What this compliance option allows you to do is adjust those targets if based on kind of a study that would be produced. So this one is a little bit more flexible, that you can say my building can't do it. The zoo's already done a ton, we've got all these animals, whatever it is, you can do justification for why you can't reduce 30%. And I don't think it's much of a change, but just that the MIA buildings will have rules developed by the end of next year. So the overall goal is to reduce 30%, but there are not specific guidelines around that yet. We've got some chat things. Good question around labs. Right now, it's all in one category. I think there's going to be a lot of complexities around these different building types, but right now, I think there's just one category for that. There is a new change on the campus scale. I think I have on the next one. I have one comment around it, but there. Yeah, so in the campus, I know specifically in the alternate compliance, there is a different way, there's different information that you submit for campuses and different procedures that you have to do. So you have to include a strategic energy management plan as part of your submittal for campuses. And that might be something too that that Derek can respond on more in the next, or in the Q&A. Yeah, so okay, so this slide going through the minimum documentation that we saw some of the kind of list versions, but I wanted to kind of point out what is being referenced and what documents are being asked for as part of these compliance documents. So all of them require an application form, which is just created by Denver. In the timeline, it's actually level 2. Denver is currently referencing this DOE audit template tool that would have to be completed. And then with that campus option would have that strategic energy management plan. For the 30% EUI reduction, the wording is a little bit different in this option now, that it's asking for completed form D out of ASHRAE 100, which is equivalent to a level 1 audit. So not exactly sure on why these two are different, but that is what is currently stated in the most recent draft of the rules and regulations. The electrification feasibility report, one clarification on when that's needed. One, if you're asking for a timeline change to say, I'm not going to meet my EUI because I'm electrifying, I'm going to install heat pumps in 2026, then you would have to do an electrification feasibility report as part of that submittal. You can also say, I don't need a different timeline, but I want to have a different target because I'm going to electrify at the 2027 interim, whatever. If you're not changing the timeline, you don't need to do all these other things. But if you just want to get your target changed because you're going to be electric in the future, then that electrification feasibility report would be required for that adjustment. The O&M program document, that's also required. So the timeline adjustment requires the most documentation, and that is based on, it's cited as the tasks following ASHRAE 100. And then there are kind of other documents if you're requesting a timeline change because of financial distress or building, there is a thing you can say you have an innovative approach, these other things, or is kind of more opportunity and options to just kind of have a little bit more free form of other information that you provide. So I wanted to point out a little bit on the electrification. So there's the kind of electrification helper credits in Energize Denver as part of the performance policy, but then there's also the electrification required by code. So that, as was mentioned, starts in 2025 as actually requiring it for the easier to electrify, the furnaces, rooftop units, and take from point of use, and then 2027 for all others. What I wanted to point out here is that you might start hearing more about these things around equal permitting. So equal permitting does require that you do an electrification feasibility report if you want to replace natural gas equipment. Starting to have calls and questions around what is this? What does this mean? For the most part, as part of the code process, this is going to be more of like a form where you put in what natural gas equipment you want to do, what electric equipment could be used instead, and review the costs and the difference in operating costs and difference in first costs. The operating cost side would also include the social cost of carbon. So this is sort of, they want to make it equal permitting, and they want to get people thinking about heat pumps. There are also incentives to help with that process. These are the kind of two buckets of incentives right now. One being the steam to electric conversion program. So any building can apply to this if it's on the steam system and they want to switch to electric systems. There is also the pilot application, which Derek mentioned, to start getting incentives to switch to electric. One thing to note is that right now, this program only focuses on the first round. So that's our easier to electrify equipment. So if you have a boiler that's natural gas, that's not steam, and it's not part of this first round, it would not be eligible for incentives in this electrification pilot at this time. Wanted to also just pull this a little bit together with the Colorado performance timeline that we are working with the state to do some of the analysis for that task force, which is coming up with recommendations. Right now, it's looking like it will be a similar program with EUI targets, and with their carbon reduction goals, the percentage reduction is similar. So looking like the 2030 targets will be similar. It will be a little tricky because they have a different interim for whatever reason. However, it got put in the Colorado state bill. They had 2026 as a 7% reduction, and then 2030 as 20%. So it is not a straight line from now to 2030, whereas Denver is a straight line. Kind of just pick the interims along your line. This one has a different reduction needed to hit that emissions path. Not for sure yet whether they're actually going to not have a straight line or they're going to adjust that or whatnot, but that is kind of a difference there. They also have a difference on the renewable energy side, which I'll mention a bit here. So I wanted to kind of just give an example. We're starting to do these studies for building owners, portfolios of buildings. Some are just have the goal to decarbonize, and some are just trying to meet the program. Both have the same kind of end goal, but might be just different objectives from what the owner is trying to achieve. I just kind of wanted to give an example of how we're looking at these projects. One, just doing that kind of inventory, looking at where the building's at, and a big part of that is verifying their data. So looking at, is the baseline really the baseline? Do they have the right areas in the system? What are their actual energy? What is their actual energy use? Setting the goals for that reduction. For some building owners, it's just my goal is to meet what I have to meet, what the city's telling me. Others have maybe more aggressive goals that say, I want to meet net zero or zero carbon by X date. And then we're really looking at 3 different prongs to the study from there. One being energy efficiency, electrification, and renewables. So energy efficiency, trying to reduce as much as we can to start. Electrification, having that plan for replacement, and then renewables. I have it kind of shown at the end. Adding renewables can be anywhere throughout the process, especially if you're going to have a hard time meeting your interims. You might have to stick on renewables on-site or off-site to hit your goal or hit your EUI target and avoid penalties. Just wanted to note here, just kind of flipping the thought process too of some of our clients are looking more at how much does it cost per ton of CO2 saved. a lot of things like this electrification, heat pumps, it could be a higher burst cost and a higher operating cost. So this concept of like simple payback or ROI, there is no ROI. But looking at what is the most cost-effective way to save carbon, or also what is the most cost-effective way to meet the EUI target. Kind of both the same, but different ways to evaluate that. And looking at kind of different bundles to meet the EUI targets. And this is just an example of how these things don't always align. This is a study that we did for Denver Public Schools. And if you look at energy use intensity, natural gas, this is across their entire portfolio, so over 170 buildings. Natural gas is by far the biggest culprit in their energy use per square foot, their EUI. So if you want to reduce EUI, you focus on natural gas, but the energy costs, electricity is the biggest culprit. Natural gas is very cheap still. And so it kind of flips the picture there. If you want to save costs, you're looking at electricity. And then in the emission side, the emissions look closer to the cost right now than they do the EUI, but as we go over time and the grid cleans, it really becomes a much smaller piece of the pie. So looking at electrification from the emission standpoint. So kind of setting those goals of where are you at now? What are your objectives? And what is the best way package to get there? This is also from that same study where we mapped all of the EUIs of the schools, looked at CBEX, so the Commercial Building Energy Consumption Survey, sort of this national average number, which is more like 70, and then also the EUI for the city of Denver for schools, which is 48. Denver Public Schools does not have to actually meet the 48 for the city, since they're kind of not bound by the city rules, but still wanted to evaluate following those recommendations. And as you can see, for this group of buildings, it's kind of all over the board. A very few number are under 48. It was a very similar spread to what the entire city looked like. So less than 20% have already met the goal. And point being here, there's a lot of buildings that are going to need deep retrofits if you're really just going to try to meet the EUI with improvements. You can always add on solar, you can do offsite solar, but just getting the EUI down alone is a pretty big undertaking. Some of these have 60, 50% reductions, which is a pretty challenging modification. Electrification, just wanted to note here that Denver kind of has it in like easy and then like everything else, or they specifically reference boilers and PTACs. There is a lot of other equipment that does have viable heat pump technology today. So as we do these studies, we're looking at where we can incorporate. So specifically for Denver Public Schools, there are unit ventilators that can be electrified now that can be used in a heat pump technology. So there are heat pumps now that can be in this distributed configuration. You still have to keep your boiler for backup. So there's different nuances there, but there is kind of technology today. When we get into the boilers, that is still in the hard to electrify, mainly because there is not heat pump technology available for that high temperature heat. In a lot of these, we are recommending partial electrification, where you keep your natural gas for backup. It could be a natural gas boiler, it could be a natural gas section in your rooftop unit, and that really helps reduce the electrical first cost and operating cost. And then renewable energy, kind of that third prong to this, is determining goals in future electricity use. This one it gets pretty tricky in the terminology around renewable energy credits. Right now, Denver is saying that it doesn't matter if you sell the RECs or not, you can count any solar that you're subscribing to or is on your buildings. The Colorado program is not allowing new RECs. They said they would grandfather in existing solar, but once it's passed, you can't add new solar and sell your RECs and count it toward your EUI commitment. So this could, in the rules and regs language, for Denver, it says that any RECs or any version of RECs are allowed, but this could change and may align with the state. But if it does change, they will continue to grandfather in the solar that did have RECs. So You just have to keep an eye on if they do change that language and consider whether or not you're trying to meet both programs. There's also some nuances in what you can say. If you've sold the RECs, Xcel Energy has a whole thing on their site of what you can and cannot say, and you're really not supposed to say that it's your renewable energy anymore. So if you want to say we're 100% renewable energy, if you've sold those RECs, technically that's not true. So there is getting into that, like, really needs to keep the RECs. This was a change on the wind source interim for the interim targets. I think there's going to be a lot of interest in that. I don't know if there's any limits on those subscriptions right now, where as opposed to the Renewable Connect, which has gotten sold out very quickly and every time it opens. But that could be a good option for a lot of people. Just looking at a couple of comments. Looking at the cost, the dollar invested per ton saved. We are really looking at kind of the lifetime of the equipment for the electrification retrofit. So if you replace a natural gas boiler with an electric heat pump boiler, we are looking at the carbon emitted over the life of that equipment, and we are using emissions factors projected by Xcel Energy if the study is in this territory. So yes, looking at it over that 20 years to say what is the kind of total carbon over that time frame and how many tons do you save with those two compared. Just last little wrap up here, just an example of one of these projects where we looked at a multifamily housing building, has a pretty normal split, 50-50 on energy or electricity and gas. And then looking at kind of these levels as we go through of might need to be able to do energy efficiency for your first interim, might need to do bigger improvements such as heat pumps to get to your next level. This particular study, they wanted to know what it would take to get to 100% carbon or 100% carbon reduction, zero carbon for the big building, which would mean full electrification of replacing the boiler and a large amount of solar, which will not all fit on site. So it would have to be a combination of offsite and on-site. This is just an example of kind of doing these studies of looking at bundles for the interims and what it would achieve overall. And I think that's my last slide. So I think that's probably good for the comments, and I'll turn it over to Taylor.
Thanks, Celeste. All right. I don't see the comments now either, so let me know when you get a comment. Sorry, it disappears. Anyways, so you made it to the last speaker. Congratulations. I hope we didn't. Some people are still on here. I'm going to talk just about new code, right? So that was all Energize Denver, existing buildings. This is the energy code for new construction, major renovation in Denver, and what's going on. So let me go to timeline here. So a few key things, right? This is really from the perspective of a practitioner that's following all this. I've been involved in some of the committee hearings, but I am not on the committee. So, you know, Jamie on the call is on the committee. There's some people that are voting members. So this is really right, just from someone that's really interested, that's following it, that practices and works on a lot of buildings in Denver. So Denver's been, you know, the 2018 IECC, when they adopted that, they had their 2019 amendments. That was the first real aggressive amendments that they had, that Denver added to the energy code. And then now this is kind of phase 2, you could say, or the second time Denver's doing this with the 2021. It's been happening for a long time, over the past year and a half, at least. Really, it ramped up. The city requested amendment proposals. They got all the proposals, and then they have their committee review proposals and vote on them. So that's all happened. And now the city's combining all those proposals into their amendments in a way that makes them not compete with each other and make sense, right? So that's what's kind of going on now. They did actually publish it for a second, and then they took it down, and now Jamie mentioned, sounds like they're giving it back to the committee next week, and then hopefully it'll be released to the public for public comment here in the next few weeks. Because of that, the original plan, this next steps you see on the bottom here, was that they would be adopting November 1st. That's been pushed to January 16th, most recently, that I just saw today on the website, which would, so January 16th, the new code would be approved, and you could use the new code or the old code through May 1st of 2023. And then after May 1st, right, you'd have to be under the new code. There is some flexibility there. It's all explained on the website if you're really interested, but you can get a grace period of 2 months after that. So July, so really July 1st, right? Everyone's going to be under the new code. So really what I want to talk about is what's some things in the new code. The new code obviously is still a work in progress, but there's some key items that I want to touch on looking through, right? This is all still, nothing's final. So it's all still up in the air, but these are kind of the key things that are going to be in there. And it's just the final language and everything that's going through that process. So I stole this. So thanks, City. This is a great outline, I think, of some of the key amendments. And then I'll go through kind of the code language of these, and then also some other key things, I think, for energy modelers that are important in the new one. And again, I'm not touching on what's new in the 2021 IECC. That's a whole nother conversation. This is just focused on the Denver amendments. So 1 and 2, this was talked about earlier with Energize Denver, adding, sorry, my son's really motivated to talk too, but adding commercial partial electrification for space heating and water heating to align with Energize Denver. So Denver didn't want to have Energize Denver for existing buildings be ahead of what they're requiring for new buildings. So that's trying to align those. We'll talk about that. And then a bunch of stuff happened with energy modeling, right? So essentially the city removed C407 and is allowing 3 modeling pathways. One being kind of that standard appendix G standard appendix G PCI methodology. So that's cost, right? Adding another one that's site energy, and then a final one that's PEUI. So this is actually pretty closely mirroring Boulder's energy pathways that they have under the 2020. The addition there being that site energy pathway. Then they messed around with these amendments to try to align the prescriptive path with these performance requirements. So a lot going on in there. If you haven't looked at the 2021 IECC prescriptive C406 points methodology, you should. There's a lot going on there. So a ton happening there for buildings that don't do modeling under prescriptive that they're going to have to comply with. And then finally, EVs actually got easier for multifamily. So EV requirement got reduced for the amount of EV capable spaces. So kind of the outline, and then I'll go through, again, I have a bunch of code snippets. They're all in red because this is not final. So yeah, don't hold me to anything, but just to try to give everyone a good idea. So space heating, electrification, this is a mandatory, both the electrification requirements are in mandatory sections of the code, but then they have all these exceptions, right? So space heating equipment, fossil fuel warm air furnaces, electric resistant space heating equipment shall not be permitted for space heating. So Denver really wants heat pumps, right? But this is an interim goal. So there's a couple things in here. Really, I think the intent of this, right, is trying to get rid of bad electric resistance that's really inefficient, and like individual, more residential style gas equipment. So you can still do larger like boilers. This does not exclude a gas boiler, right? I think something that got confusing, and we'll see how the final language comes out. Again, this is a draft, not final. But it's like, are RTUs with gas exempt? Is there certain size? Is there a certain type? There's some exemptions down here for makeup air units and unit air, things serving kitchens, right? So things like that, there's some exemptions in here. You can read through all of them. The other important thing is that you can do electric resistance if you comply with the energy modeling pathway. That got on there, and some of this electric resistance for reheat got in here, but really a lot of this is for just keeping flexibility. If you're doing passive house for a multifamily building and you want to put in electric base heaters, go for it, right? You're going to meet the energy code pathway. But if you're just kind of going through prescriptive compliance and you want to do a bunch of electric resistance for heating, the new code won't allow it. Domestic hot water is really similar. Essentially what it's saying is individual residential style fossil fuel and electric resistance water heaters will no longer be allowed. Again, a bunch of exceptions, right? So point of use stuff is still allowed. If you're using renewable and have electric backup, the electric resistance backup for heat pump water heaters is still allowed. And then the key here too, right, is like a central gas boiler with storage is still allowed. So it's really, this one's really going after that individual ones. And then again, if you're doing the modeling pathway, you could do electric resistance as long as you meet the requirements. They also added some demand response. So I'm going to kind of fly through these just because I don't want to take too long and we've been talking for a long time. So some demand response stuff there. EV charging already talked about, but essentially it just changed for residential multifamily. It was that 80% had to be ready. Now that's 40. So they just reduced that burden. Everything else remained the same. This is what I was talking about with C406. It gets crazy, huge list, bunch of point options. All of this Denver messed with to align. The biggest takeaway from this, though, is this credit for all electric buildings versus all other buildings. If you're going prescriptive and you're all electric, it's not a huge deal. If you're not all electric, you got to get a ton of points, and you're going to be looking at this menu trying to figure out everything you can do to get all your points for a while. So that's that big takeaway there. Cool. So let's talk modeling, right? So C407, it's still there. It's just the C407 methodology that we all know and hate or love, I don't know, depends on who you are, is totally gutted and basically replaced with the PCI methodology, right? So really leaning on ASHRAE. If you're doing any baseline modeling, the intent is that it's following ASHRAE Appendix G methodology for the new code. So you got to follow that. We've got specific building performance factors. All electric gets a break from all other buildings. So again, really incentivizing electrification. This does have a gas baseline. So I think if you're an all electric building, you're probably not complying with this option anyways, because other options really help electric buildings way more than this one. And then the other thing I want to point out that's important and new is these backstops. So if you're doing the modeling pathway, there is some insulation backstop requirements here. They're not super burdensome, but they are there. So again, similar to what Boulder's done in the 2020 code, there's some backstops. You can't just have no insulation all over the place for certain reasons. You're going to have to meet these backstops. So then so that's C407, right? PCI. Then there's going to be two appendix. Appendix PT is, which I actually don't remember the two. So this one is the PEUI. Oh, great. Yeah. So this one, similar to Boulder, right? And this aligns closest to Energize Denver. So this is saying no baseline, don't do all that crazy calculation, model your proposed, hit the target, and you're good, right? So these are the EUI targets. It's really limited in scope right now. The idea of this of this one, I actually proposed it to the committee, so I can tell you the intent behind it was right to put our foot in the water. Denver wants to get here eventually, but they don't want this to be the only option. So it's really limited in scope to try it out under this code cycle and hopefully develop it more and implement it more in the future code cycles. It's very small because there's a whole nother document called Denver Modeling Rules and Procedures that you'll be required to follow if you're going to follow this pathway to try to help inform better models. So PT is PEUI, SE is site energy. So again, PCI, the biggest problem that it has for a jurisdiction like Denver that's looking to electrify is it has a gas baseline for 5A or for 5B, excuse me, for that climate zone. So this appendix tries to deal with that by doing site energy, right? So you still have a gas baseline, but you're not doing cost. You're doing site energy. So that aligns better with Energize Denver as well. You still get a break on your building performance factor for all electric, but really if you're a mostly electric, really anything other than a full gas heating building, this and the PEUI method are going to be I assume will be used more because not using that cost and having that gas cost issue. So that's great. And I think I honestly think this will probably be the most commonly used pathway for new constructions building. The EUI pathway, again, it's kind of dipping the toe in the water. It was meant to be pretty hard. This one, I think, right, most buildings will go. And if you're all electric, I think this will be the easiest pathway through code. Yeah, so sorry, I know I just went right through that, but yeah, thanks everybody.
All right, well, thanks for that. And we have plenty of time for Q&A. We're kind of answering questions as we went along, but if anyone didn't get a question answered via the chat, go ahead and feel free to ask that now.
I can talk a little bit more about campus scale too. I know that was a question that was asked. So we are releasing more guidance on it too in November, but it's really, we're offering a different avenue for alternate compliance. And we can look at it at a full campus level. Sorry, I have something in my throat right now, of course. But also in terms of solar, we're allowing solar if it's on the campus level to be applied to any individual building of the campus choosing. So those are, I don't have too much, but those are the two higher level items that'll be coming out more in November too.
And do you know when you said the alternate compliance, so that it had some specifics if they were suggesting a different timeline. Is there anything if you just want to like suggest a different target, or is it a whole separate alternative compliance that'll be developed, or is it really just part of that timeline?
It's really still a similar timeline adjustment, but it's the way that people are going to submit information if it's want to be a campus level compliance adjustment or individual buildings. Can Casser share how Denver is planning to comply with its building portfolio? There are many steam loop, for example, on the steam loop. So we're actually going to start to create a stakeholder group for building specifically on the steam loop because it's been constantly revisited issue. And so we're going to, that's probably going to be something we're going to keep amending in its own way, just because steam loop is so difficult and we know that the efficiencies aren't gonna be able to be hit. So steam loop is one that is still getting worked on. Any other things within this building portfolio in particular you're referring to?
think you've maybe meaning City of Denver buildings.
Oh, our buildings. So we're actually looking to hire somebody in the next couple months, I believe, to address the municipal buildings specifically. So we've started to do our own ASHRAE level 2 audits of buildings and taking some equipment inventory. And so we should have some more information hopefully released maybe spring of next year. It is.
Right, any more questions, or otherwise we can wrap it up and call it a meeting? Going once and twice. You can always reach out to either me and I can try to answer the question, or if the other presenters on the call would be okay with you reaching out to them and you could ask them questions, you know, offline.
Yep, happy to answer questions.
Yeah, I just put my email in the chat if anybody would like to shoot me an email separately too.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and do that for me. All right, well, thanks again for our presenters for joining us in this nice October evening to talk about updates to the energy codes. You know, it's super important stuff, and glad we could all get together and, you know, discuss this. So look forward to hearing more about it in the future. And just a little about upcoming Sim Club events. We are hoping to have one more this year, and it might be like a student night if y'all join for any of those. And we'll post that on our usual avenues on like LinkedIn and our mailing list. And we're also hoping by maybe January or February to be decided to do kind of an in-person sort of informal event, like maybe a happy hour like we did, I don't even 2018, I think maybe was the last time we did one of those, or 2019. So we'll send out some invites for those. All right, well, thank you all so much. Y'all have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.